This is a republic, if you can keep it, with Mark Brewer and Jeff Timmer.
I'm Mark Brewer. Welcome to the World War Trump episode of A Republic If You Can Keep It. The first recipient of a previously owned Nobel Peace Prize apparently wants to be the Genghis Khan of the 21st century. In the last week alone, in an attempt to distract from his domestic trouble, Trump has threatened to invade Venezuela if his hand-picked government doesn't do his bidding, stationed a naval armada near Iran in preparation for an aerial war, hinted at an important effort at regime change in Cuba. He's doubled down on his armed assault on the Constitution in Minneapolis with a change in messaging, but little else. He replaced one Nazi-adjacent ICE commander with a fascist-adjacent ICE commander in Minneapolis, bringing vague promises of a future drawdown on mass thugs roaming the streets, but not quite yet. He sent his FBI and Tulsi Gabbard to investigate the 2020 presidential election in Georgia, a continuation of his fantasy that fraud cost him a win over Joe Biden. He had his FBI raid the home of a reporter who was doing his job reporting on a protest, all in violation of federal law. And finally, he arrested Don Lemon for covering a peaceful Minneapolis protest because it, quote, disrupted a religious service.
I'm Jeff Timmer. Even after Mark's long list there, the week's not over yet, so there's still more to come. Trump has also inspired a powerful anthem from the boss. Bruce Springsteen's The Streets of Minneapolis pulls no punches in denouncing Trump, Ice Barbie, and Stephen Miller. Due to copyright restrictions, we're not going to play it here, but it's well worth a visit to YouTube to watch and listen and learn. Trump World is also having a direct impact on Michigan politics. Between naps and summary executions of American citizens, Trump has reportedly inserted himself into the battle for the GOP's gubernatorial nomination, torpedoing frontrunner John James and encouraging 78 years old, I don't believe he's that young, but I'll go along with it, fellow rich guy Perry Johnson's newly announced campaign for Michigan governor.
Just a note on Perry Johnson there, Jeff. He's one of the ones who couldn't even get enough signatures 4 years ago to get on the ballot, so we'll see what happens this time. But anyway, in other Michigan news, Michigan Democrats have launched their first attack ad on independent gubernatorial candidate Mike Duggan.
We made it very difficult for you to bring in soil unless we were confident of where it came from.
The Duggan administration made a surprise announcement that it had accidentally spread a bunch of toxic dirt throughout the city on home demolition sites. They refused to tell me.
A Republican dark money group is promoting one of the Democrats in next week's primary to fill a state Senate special election seat, with the belief that State Board of Education President Pamela Pugh would be easier to beat in the April general election, and Democrats are crying foul.
We value honesty. We value forthrightness. We value, being who you are. And these tactics, not a big surprise from anybody that's supporting Trump or involved with the Trump campaign. These are underhanded and dishonest, and we will stand for them.
It's dishonest, it's deceptive, and it's downright dirty.
Also here in Michigan, Senator Alyssa Slotkin has come quite a ways on Kristi Noem. She acknowledged in a Senate speech this week that she had voted to confirm her, but now says Kristi Noem has to go.
She should resign. If she doesn't resign, the president should do what he's done in the past and fire her. And if she doesn't get fired, she should be impeached.
Later in the podcast, we'll be joined by author, pundit, columnist, and political science guru Norm Ornstein, emeritus scholar at the conservative think tank American Enterprise Institute, with his assessment of congressional dysfunction and Trump's drive for one-person rule.
Jeff, before we go on to the fascinating conversation with Norm Ornstein, let's begin with the reported moves by Trump this week to change the trajectory of the Michigan primary campaign for governor here in Michigan. He continues to push very hard on John James to abandon his gubernatorial bid, return to the Congress, where they are at risk of losing their majority. And instead, this week, we see Perry Johnson running for maybe his fourth or fifth office and willing to spend billions of dollars to do it. What do you make of all this, Jeff?
Well, the entrance of Perry Johnson into the Republican primary race we can look at him as a gadfly, a cartoon character, Mr. Burns, from The Simpsons, come to life and running for governor. The temptation would be to not take him seriously. He was a clown in his 2022 effort to run for governor, didn't even get on the ballot. He was a clown in 2023 when he ran for president. He ran for president, he had no intention of winning. He knew that wasn't the case. He went out and spent a year and $20 million of his own dollars to cheerlead for Donald Trump in Iowa and New Hampshire and other places around the country, drawing attention onto himself as somebody who would be a Donald Trump defender. When Donald Trump got into the race, Perry Johnson got out. We need to take Perry Johnson seriously. He fundamentally changes the dynamic of the Republican primary. John James is a paper tiger with a glass jaw and feet of clay when it comes to taking a punch in politics. And Mike Cox, I had said, if the field had been set, Mike Cox was going to have to spend his personal fortune to go after John James. Now Mike Cox can sit back and let Perry Johnson do that, because Perry Johnson has one mission over the next 60 days. They've announced this $9 million wave campaign over the next 60 days, and that's going to be introduce himself to the Michigan Republican primary voters as the defender of Donald Trump, the true MAGA. And he's going to fly kamikaze into John James's campaign, and it will fundamentally change this dynamic. If it works and Trump endorses, Perry Johnson becomes the prohibitive favorite to win the nomination, because Republican primary voters will follow Trump's lead. November general election voters will not. So I think it gives a big shakeup to the Republican primary field. There are still only 3 candidates who have the financial wherewithal to be serious candidates, and that's John James, Perry Johnson, and Mike Cox. Eric Nesbitt and Tom Leonard simply do not have the financial wherewithal to be serious candidates and run serious statewide candidacies. So that's how I think it changes things. But we're going to see how this MAGA madness that we've seen in Minnesota with the stormtroop tactics and summary executions, the federal raid and assault on free and fair state elections in the state of Georgia, dating back to 2020 now, this madness and delusion of election denialism, we can expect to see this injected at a greater rate with greater volume and intensity and ferocity, as Republicans are already making this an issue against Jocelyn Benson, trying to claim that she's doing something nefarious by not turning over all of our Michigan voter sensitive data that is not available to the federal government, do God knows what with it other than trample our rights.
Well, Jeff, as always, that was great analysis. I'll just add one thing to it. Before all this can happen, even though the media war the next couple months can happen, Perry Johnson has to get on the ballot, something he utterly failed to do in 2022. And now he only has until late April to gather the necessary signatures. So we'll see if he can even become a nominee in this race, notwithstanding all the resources and everything that he brings to bear that you have so well described.
Well, you're perfectly right there, Mark. But he can do the damage to John James and leave him as a roadkill in this process, even if he doesn't make the ballot. If Perry Johnson were, I doubt they'll make that mistake again. The guy pulling the strings there, you can call it elder abuse, fleecing somebody of their fortune when they don't have the mental capacity to make the decisions themselves. John Yob has been doing a good job of that with Perry Johnson in the political sense since 2022. He does have the professional wherewithal this time around to make sure they don't repeat the same fatal mistakes of 2022.
More on A Republic If You Can Keep It after these messages.
The presenting sponsor of A Republic If You Can Keep It is Epic MRA, measuring the pulse of Michigan for more than 4 decades.
When most of us think about polling, the focus is on those campaign polls telling us which candidates are winning. But the most important polls are for businesses, local governments, and nonprofits assessing the needs and wants of their customers or constituencies.
Those are polls that guide policies and lead to institutional success. Those polls have to get it right, which makes the choice of a public opinion research firm critical. Epic MRA has been trusted for more than 4 decades to get it right. Our clients have included school boards, statewide nonprofits, corporations, as well as the candidates and news media who rely on us during political campaigns. Whether it's just a couple of questions or a full in-depth survey, we are here and ready to help.
You can reach us at epicmra.com.
Joining the conversation this week is Norm Ornstein, an emeritus scholar at the conservative think tank American Enterprise Institute. He is the co-author with Thomas Mann of It's Even Worse Than It Looks, How the American Constitutional System Collided with the New Politics of Extremism. Norm is a Minnesota native, where he was a child prodigy, graduating from high school when he was only 14 and from college when he was 18. He received his BA from the University of Minnesota and his PhD in political science from the University of Michigan.
By the mid-1970s, Norm had become a professor of political science at Catholic University in Washington, D.C., establishing a reputation as an expert on the United States Congress. Ornstein is a frequent contributor to the Washington Post, The Atlantic, National Journal, New Republic, and other publications. He wrote a weekly column for Roll Call for 11 years and was co-director of the AEI Brookings Election Reform Project. He helped draft key parts of the 2002 Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, also known as the McCain-Feingold Act. Ornstein is a registered Democrat, but considers himself a centrist and has voted for individuals from both parties. Norm Ornstein, thank you so much for joining us on A Republic, if you can keep it. I mean, there's so much to talk about. Where I'd like to focus is, we've all been witnessing this last month, the shock troops in the street, summary executions, arresting people, killing people for exercising their First and Second Amendment rights, violating Fourth Amendment rights, and all kinds of other amendments I'm probably not even thinking of. But what we've seen
Don't forget
is a
10.
palpable shift in at least Republicans. It feels kind of to me like maybe potentially like January 6th, where people kind of went, wait a minute, hold on, we've got to stop this. But then they were pulled back. Republicans in Washington right now are at least putting on the facade of caring about the excess and abuse and trampling of the Constitution and rule of law. Do you think it's going to hold? Do you think it's going to matter? Is this congressional oversight that they're talking about, hearings and whatnot, is this just going to be artifice?
Yes. It's facade and artifice are two good words for this, Jeff. The number of Republicans who are actually going to go against Donald Trump in any significant way, who are going to recapture any of the notion of an independent Congress, is a trace element at best. And what we're seeing is we've seen a couple of senators, one retiring, Tom Tillis in North Carolina, another probably going to be retired, Bill Cassidy in Louisiana, who've actually objected significantly, strenuously to what ICE has been doing in terrorizing people around the country. We had Susan Collins with her usual strong statement of concern about what was going on, particularly in her state of Maine, and managed to get Kristi Noem to agree to pull the troops out of Maine. But Susan Collins hasn't expressed concern about the rest of the country and has supported full funding of ICE without restrictions. So I'm not sanguine that we're going to see a sudden uprising. Now, the caveat here is that we've got Trump's standing cratering further. He is down to probably 37% approval, and certainly it's gone south on immigration. And we know what motivates a lot of his voters, which is not whether they're shooting and assassinating and raping people they don't like. It's the economy. Very interesting column today from Paul Krugman, who has one of those must-read Substacks. Something that I've been harping on for a while. The price of gold now apparently is up over $5,000 an ounce. The price of silver has shot way up, even as the dollar has declined. Why do gold and silver go up now? They're going up not because interest rates are too low for people to want to invest in dollars, but because they don't trust the dollar anymore as the reserve currency of the nation. Trump has announced, or at least it appears he's announced today, that he is going to pick Kevin Warsh to head the Federal Reserve as the chair when the term of Jay Powell expires. I know Kevin Warsh. He is not a dumb guy, but he's also a guy who is being picked because he will do whatever Trump wants. And while the reaction to him will not be immediate in the same way as it would have been if he'd picked Kevin Hassett, where the markets would have tanked because they knew what kind of a lightweight they were going to be dealing with, I think we're going to see more economic turmoil. And that may turn more people against Trump, more of the Trump voters. And that may get some of these Republicans to take baby steps away from him. But the fact is, we cannot rely on the guardrail of Congress as long as Republicans have majorities.
Yeah. You mentioned Tom Tillis, which I was thinking about him this morning. I was reading some of his comments that were reported in either the New York Times or Washington Post, or maybe both, where it was portrayed as him unloading on the Trump administration on, reaction to ICE. But when I read it, it underscored to me the fundamental problem with the Republicans, because what Tom Tillis was still painfully trying to do was separate Donald Trump from these actions. Donald Trump is getting bad advice. Donald Trump has bad people around him. If Donald Trump needs to open his eyes and see what's going on, as if this isn't intentional and by design, as if this is just happening accidentally. It still is this equivocation, either refusal to acknowledge what is clearly evident to people of sanity and who can recognize truth and fact, or it still demonstrates this inexplicable cowardice to just stand up and say, stop, enough, this is wrong, that we've seen from the Republicans for so long. Tom Tillis is walking out the door, never going to run for anything again, and he still won't say Donald Trump is at the center of this storm.
So a couple of points there, Jeff. One is, we have to start with the most important word here, which is cult. What does it mean to be in a cult? And the Republican Party is not a party anymore. It's certainly not a traditional political party. It's a cult, and Donald Trump is the cult leader. The fear of being excommunicated or shunned or of physical violence is what binds a cult together and keeps people loyal beyond those who believe everything that the cult leader says. And what we know is that a very significant share of Republicans in Congress know that this is horrible nonsense, but they're not going to deviate too far. And for Tillis, going back to North Carolina and having his friends and acquaintances and all of those he has dealt with over the years look upon him as a traitor, it's just a bridge too far. Tillis is also, I will say, his strongest words have been about FEMA, because we've had, this horrible snowstorm that was worse in the southern states. And we know the hurricane damage is still there in parts of North Carolina. And Trump screwed over North Carolina. They've, hollowed out FEMA. So there's a lot of unhappiness there. But we're not going to see these people go against him. And the other thing is that so much of the criticism about the Gestapo tactics in Minnesota coming from Republicans is not the horror at what they've done. It's that they've lost the public relations battle. So, I'm circling back, not sanguine that we're going to see any significant pushback from Republicans. The question is whether you get 2 or 3 or 4 in the House when they begin to bring up impeachment resolutions against Kristi Noem and others, some of whom are going to be in very tough reelection battles, who might go along, and we might actually see some, at least black eyes for people who are a part of this thuggish response.
Norm, if I could, I want to switch topics here with you. The other, I think, major dramatic event that occurred this week was this Fulton County search warrant, where we see Trump pursuing his fantasy that the 2020 election was actually his. He won. And now we have, federal officials seizing ballots. I'm very concerned about what that could mean for 26. Now, I'll just give you an example. Here in Michigan and Detroit, you may know, Detroit counts all of its AV ballots in one place. And that's usually the majority of the vote in Detroit. I could see federal marshals coming in before those ballots are counted and seizing them next fall and just throwing the whole election here, not in Detroit, but in Michigan, up for grabs. Am I being paranoid about what could happen as a result of these kind of legal maneuvers?
Sometimes being paranoid reflects reality. And I see what happened in Fulton County as a beta test for November. But let's also tie this back to Minnesota. Remember that Pam Bondi called the governor and other officials in Minnesota and said, we'll pull the troops out, the ICE people, the Border Patrol people, if you turn over all of the sensitive data on your voter rolls. Now, that made it clear that this wasn't about immigration enforcement. Of course, Trump had already said it was retribution, but it was also an attempt to hold the state hostage to get their voter rolls. We're going to see this in other places. And I think what happened in Fulton County is chilling and, should be the biggest story of this week, actually. Certainly bigger than Tom Homan going in. And even in the hours after he said, we've got a new regime here and we're only going to, prioritize the violent criminals, they've been continuing their mayhem, and they're doing it all over the country. But seizing voting machines, if they really think, if things go further south, and they believe that they're going to suffer a bloodbath in the midterm elections, I would put nothing past them in terms of what they'll do to distort the results. And that includes, I'm seeing an awful lot of talk about passing what they call the SAVE Act in the Senate, which is a voter suppression measure. They want to try and take over federal voting so that they can limit votes, take away mail-in votes. And we know what happens in many places, including in the states where they have control, is that they limit the number of polling places in blue areas so that if people go to vote in person, there are very long lines. And you can be sure that there will be ICE people there who will pull a few citizens out of line, beat the crap out of them, haul them away for 3 days, maybe do what they've been doing in other places, which is to take them down to Texas and then release them without any means for them to get back home again. Citizens and people who are here legally, all as an effort of voter intimidation. And the final stage, which they will use, is just as you say, Mark, it is to seize voting machines. We had on HBO a while back the dramatization of the Philip Roth novel about basically Lindbergh becoming president and the Nazis, in effect, prevailing. And there, one of the most chilling scenes was actually an election where voters were rebelling against the thugs, and it was votes by the side of the road being burned. To imagine that that's fantasy now that we've seen the reality is to be hopelessly naive.
Yeah, no, I think states have really got to make an effort to literally harden the voting infrastructure, the protection of those ballots, and we could see a lot of confrontations before and on election day as these federal officials, backed by federal troops, show up to do that, seize voting machines, seize ballots, and try to disrupt the election. It could be a violent election day this year, and I'm very concerned about that.
And, if I were a governor, a Democratic governor, I would be preparing for this by basically calling out the state National Guard and bringing state troopers and others to protect voting sites. And you're absolutely right that there could then be violent confrontations. It appears we know what happened in Fulton County. They sidelined the Georgia U.S. attorneys and Georgia officials.
Right.
They did not do this by getting their warrant in Georgia. They got it in Missouri. And the U.S. attorney, who is a protege of Eric Schmidt, the senator from Missouri, who is a Nazi, and I don't use that term lightly, one of the worst of the worst. And we know that Dominion voting systems, which, of course, sued successfully and got $700 million from Fox after Fox claimed that they had rigged the system, was purchased by a Trump supporter. Now, I, with a task force on election crises, had a Zoom call with him where he reassured everybody that he was doing this to keep the system safe. But this was now using the pretext that foreign influence had distorted the Dominion system in Georgia, and that's why they got the warrant to be able to do this, and that's why the foreign influence angle got Tulsi Gabbard, whose best friend is probably Vladimir Putin, to be there on scene, where normally that would be completely out of bounds, and all of this is utterly outrageous.
Well, let me, if I could, you just mentioned Tulsi Gabbard, and you mentioned cult earlier, and there's no better person to personify the cult mentality in this Trump administration, I think, than Tulsi Gabbard, who has a history of being in a cult and excising herself from a cult and then rejoining the cult. So the optics of the intel chief engaged in internal domestic election logistics, really, should be very chilling to folks. The Dominion new head of Dominion should be very alarming to folks, because this is a classic, the fox telling the chickens as he's taken over the hen house, don't worry, I'm just here to safeguard you guys. And we've talked about this in Minnesota and in Fulton County, etc. But I want to bring this back because most of our listeners, or a good number of them, are here in Michigan, where this same dynamic is playing out. Not only was Michigan at the epicenter of the aftermath of the 2020 election, it was Fulton County and Detroit and Maricopa County that were the uncertain places. We saw all that, those national scenes. There were scenes that were broadcast nationally of the mega crowd outside the Detroit counting board, looking like a Night of the Living Dead, trying to get into the counting board. We can expect to see more of that. The threat and extortion, give us your data or else, is playing out here in Michigan. Our good friend, Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, who will be the Democratic nominee for governor next year, she has been sued by the RNC and other Trump acolytes to turn over this data. It is already manifesting itself as an issue with the Republicans running for the nomination to oppose her. They're using this as she won't give, she's trying to impede free and fair elections. They're whipping up this narrative. And so we have to be, what we're seeing around the country, it's happening here. It's not happening at that kind of alarming, shocking. They're not in here yet hitting protesters over the head with batons and tear gas and rubber bullets, or summary executions, but we have to be prepared for the fact that this is, or not the fact, the very high probability that this is going to start to play out here as they try to, ahead of time, lay the groundwork to disrupt this election. And they're, like I said, they're going to do it in Milwaukee, they're going to do it in Philadelphia, they're going to do it in Clark County, in Maricopa and Pico County, in Arizona. They're going to be doing it all over, where these the statewide elections to secure free and fair elections that we were so successful in defending in 2022 against MAGA election deniers. They're going to be targeting the open seats like Michigan. They're going to be targeting Josh Shapiro. They're going to be targeting Katie Hobbs in Arizona for sure, and these secretaries of state. But they're also going to be causing this disruption in these competitive congressional districts that are held by Republicans, where their majority is going to evaporate. The Michigan 7 and Tom Barrett, Michigan 4 and Bill Huizenga, Michigan 10, the John James open seat, Mike Lawler, and the seats in Arizona and Pennsylvania and Iowa and California and New York. I can go on. But that's what we have to be worried about here, I think, is the wave is building, no question about it. We saw it all through 2025. We have dozens of data points of Democrats performing far and above where political gravity would allow them to exist if it weren't for this climate that just continues to get more toxic and the wind blowing more strongly in the face of Republicans. They are already systematically approaching this in a way that is going to make the election outcome where they can't control if we show up in force, we being the majority of Americans who are said enough, no fucking way, we're not going to stand for this anymore. They're just going to throw the whole outcome into, well, we can't even count the ballots. I mean, I think that's what we need to talk more about and take seriously. It sounds hyperbolic. It sounds, for 10 years, I felt like Chicken Little saying the sky is falling. But when the sky is falling, it's not wrong to talk about it.
I would add one other element, which is constitutional sheriffs. There are probably 1,000 of them around the country, and Michigan is an epicenter of these people who have legitimate law enforcement authority, but who believe that they are above the law, that they answer to a higher authority, which is, of course, a distorted view of Jesus. And you can imagine some of them trying to interfere in the election process with their own law enforcement people. So it's not just the feds we have to worry about. It's distorted law enforcement in many states. I just want to add with Michigan that as we saw all of the criticism of Alex Preddy, what was he doing carrying a gun? You aren't supposed to do that, by the people who lauded Kyle Rittenhouse. But the first image that came to my mind actually was not Kyle Rittenhouse. It was about the people with assault weapons in the Michigan Capitol, in the legislature. It was about the ones who threatened to and tried to kidnap and assassinate Governor Whitmer. There wasn't a peep out of these people about any of that. And of course, we know that Alex Preddy had his gun in a holster and never touched it. And the others have brandished their weapons. And of course, it's a reflection, circling back to where you started, Jeff. This is a group of people who believe that the First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, is for us, freedom of the press, but not for you. They've not just arrested Don Lemon, but Minnesota journalists who were there covering the disruption at the church where a pastor was an ICE person. That their freedom of religion doesn't extend to Islam or to anything really except Christianity. But their freedom of speech is about their speech, not our speech. The Second Amendment, we can brandish any weapons we want, but you can't. The Fourth Amendment, there doesn't exist. We don't need any warrants to go in and break into people's houses. Unreasonable search and seizure applies to you and not to me. The 10th Amendment, states' rights are for the southern states and the red states. They're not for Minnesota, Maine, or any of the others. And we can only expect that to get worse and not better as we try to endure the next, not just this year, but the next 3 years.
This is what I constantly struggle with. We talk about, it feels overwhelming. It feels, this is I think Ruth Ben-Ghiat and others repeatedly point to, this is the classic authoritarian 101. Make this feel inevitable. Make it feel overwhelming. Make it feel bigger than it is. Remove hope. Resistance is futile. Look at the polls. Look at the reaction. Look at places like I saw some protests at a congressional town hall in Alabama, and I'm looking at Alabama, and people are showing up. If it's happening in these reddest of red places, there are more of us. All people, I will say this, all 77 million people who voted for Donald Trump, my former Republican tribesmen and women, the people who are still MAGA, they're not bad people at heart. They've fallen in with a bad crowd. That might sound like a lame excuse, but the whole country is not lost. We can break this fever bit by bit, erode into this, but we don't need Republican votes to win this election, to stop this madness, to show up in the streets and protest like they're doing in Minnesota. We need to take it everywhere all the time for the next 10 months until this election and then beyond. But I think we need to give people some, at least we can overcome this. We can keep calling it out. What are some other ways that you think, what can congressional Democrats in the minority do, not just rhetorically and optically and with PR, but are there things they can do procedurally to start to throw wrenches in the gear that they haven't done yet? It's time to pull all the tools out. What can they do to help slow this down and draw attention to it?
Before I get to that, Jeff, just to respond to something that you said, I wrote a piece a couple of months ago on decency, and it made the point that you have made. We all have friends, neighbors, relatives who are MAGA people. And if you separate that out from some of them, not all of them, they're people you would trust with your child, with your dog, with protecting your house if you're away for a period of time. And we've got to find better ways to appeal to their decency. And I think what's happened in Minnesota has been a shock that has caused at least some who were either indifferent to what was going on or hadn't followed a lot of what was going on, or who've had some qualms but now recognize that what's happened is indecent. And we need to keep the focus on that. But it's also important to keep in mind what Steve Bannon said in 2015, which continues to be true. We flood the zone with outrages, and then it all kind of washes over. When I looked at the negotiations that were going on over a shutdown because of Minnesota to try and force changes in ICE and the Border Patrol, my first reaction was, because of their concern about the PR and the optics, they're going to say they're negotiating. And the administration stepped in to negotiate. But what they would do is try and get this dragged out as long as they could. And they will probably tone down what's happening in Minnesota, hoping that the attention span of the public is short enough that they'll, get past this. But beyond that, they will flood the zone with other things. Iran. If this really begins to go further downhill for Trump, I think they'll bomb the crap out of Iran. I think we're going to see more things happening with Venezuela. I think we're going to see other efforts to turn people's attention away from what they've done in Fulton County, what they've done with their arrests and the retribution with the American Gestapo that's been operating around the country. They'll take it away from Minnesota. We're already seeing it rear its ugly head yet again in Portland. We're seeing it in other parts of the country. They're not stopping those tactics in different places, but they think it's not going to get the same traction. Now, what can you do? I have long pushed my friends in the House, the Democrats in the House, to begin some impeachment resolutions. It's not that they're going to result in somebody being removed from office, but an impeachment resolution, once it's introduced, is a privileged resolution. They have to bring it up ahead of other things, and it has to get an hour of debate and votes on each article of impeachment. Now, what does that mean? It means that you can bypass what Mike Johnson, the horrible Speaker of the House, wants to do, which is to block any action on anything. You can at least begin to call out, and with different articles of impeachment, the outrages that these people in the Trump administration are doing. Now we're seeing that for the first time move forward with Kristi Noem. 3/4 of the Democrats in the House have signed on to an effort to do an impeachment resolution against Kristi Noem. They still haven't written it. They're probably going to hold some hearings. Well, they're not official hearings because they're in the minority, and compile the evidence. Bring that up, and it basically forces press attention and public attention on what Kristi Noem, who is a corrupt, sadistic monster, has been doing at the Department of Homeland Security and unleashing these thugs around the country. Do the same with RFK Jr., who's responsible for deaths and destruction around the country. Do it for Pete Hegseth, who's violated every norm and is distorting the military. And, with Noem, remember the Republican margin in the House is 2. If you can push this, get all of your Democrats, and maybe get 3 Republicans in districts where they know there's been a huge backlash to join you, even if she's not convicted, the fact that the House run by Republicans impeaches Kristi Noem will be big news, and you can use that lever. What we're seeing in the Senate now, at least, is a willingness to use their ability to block funding to try and instigate changes in some of these behaviors. And while, they might get 1 vote, Rand Paul, who is actually, an extremist in so many ways, but has enough integrity to say, as a libertarian, this is not what government should be doing, and has been pretty clear-eyed and tough on this stuff. Even if you lose a John Fetterman, who clearly needs help on the Democratic side, you're going to be able to hold it with a filibuster. But, the tools are fairly limited. At the same time, I've wanted House and Senate Democrats to do more in terms of holding their own field hearings, going into Republican districts, doing town halls in those Republican districts and states where the Republicans themselves are too cowardly to get in front of their own voters. I'd like to see in Minnesota, Democrats go into Tom Emmer's district. Tom Emmer, a Republican, member of the Republican leadership, who has been utterly vile, who led an effort a few months back to try and get the Somali Americans, and 95% or so of the Somalians in Minnesota are citizens, to get them to vote Republican. Go in there and point out to Tom Emmer's constituents what a monster he is and how he's turned his back on the voters of his own state, the residents and citizens of his own state. You'll get attention for this. You'll put pressure on them. There are levers that you can use to try and make this work. The other thing I would just say is I've wanted for a long time the Democrats in Congress, the Democrats in the House, to set up a message group, to have Hakeem Jeffries, their leader, have a group of maybe 20 or 30 that meet every night and create a message for the week and have it used in every venue, in hearings, on the floor, in television appearances, on social media. Focus on one thing. The way to counter flooding the zone with outrages is to focus on a particular outrage so that it can penetrate the public, which doesn't happen now because this stuff is a one-day story and then it goes away in most instances. It's not going away with Renee Good and Alex Preddy. They're now trying to change the narrative on Preddy that he was a violent guy, which has nothing to do with whether he was held down on prostrate while they pumped 10 bullets into him and then celebrated by counting the bullets instead of getting medical help or even saying, oh my God, what have we done? But you can get a different way to get a public understanding that what's going on is nothing normal. And we haven't seen that enough from congressional Democrats, House or Senate.
Well, Norm Ornstein, thank you for joining us. The time has gone by too quickly. I've enjoyed this conversation. I could talk about this well, I've talked about it for 10 years. I can talk about it. I'll probably have to talk about it for another 10 years. I'm getting pretty tired. But thank you. Thank you for your voice. Folks, you can find Norm on Twitter or X, if you call it that. Where can people read you, find your thoughts and columns? I know you've got a long body of history out there.
I do write a fair amount, often in the Contrarian and in the New Republic. But I also have a podcast that I do with David Rothkopf called Words Matter.
All right.
We do that every week.
We'll put that on the website as well, and we'll put it in the in our posts on Twitter and elsewhere as we publicize this episode. Again, Norm Ornstein, thank you so much. You're, I think, a very refreshing voice on Twitter, where we've gotten to know one another a little bit, and so I appreciate it. I appreciate you. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Norm. That was great.
Thanks,
Right.
Mark.
And with that, we're done for this week. Our great thanks to Professor Norm Ornstein for his tremendous insights into our turbulent political world.
If you are listening to the podcast, you can have the joy of watching us and our guests through our YouTube channel. Click on the link on our website, arepublicpodcast.com, to subscribe.
We're beginning to recover from our excitement, our utter hysteria over the worldwide debut of Melania, the greatest documentary ever, according to reviews from Donald and Barron Trump themselves. Let's break out the popcorn.
I cannot wait to not watch this movie. Rumor has it that the Trumps will demand that the winner of this year's Oscars for Best Documentary give them a trophy, or he'll invade Greenland or Iceland or maybe Pittsburgh. Regardless, though, if the Republic is still standing and Tom Homan now doesn't object, Mark and I will return next week. As always, thank you for your attention to this matter.
A Republic, if you can keep it, is a copyrighted presentation of Michigan citizens for a better tomorrow.